the rituals happen. The Rosetta Stone was used in ritual with me. If you want a little brushstroke visual on that, think of like the Da Vinci Code scene with the sexual event on the rock. Okay. I just remember that and being off to the side in robes. So the memory is like a paper airplane in the dark. So when I get these bits back, the piece I got with tunnels from Smithsonian, I'm on a cart. It is yellow metal. It's like one of those little airport transport kind of carts, so it's open. There's no seatbelt for me. I'm probably drugged because when I get the memory back, that's what it feels like. I'm holding on to a little bar and I can see like chipped yellow paint in my hand, and then we're in, and then I just get F3 written in like military sort of stencil in yellow on the wall. And that. So yes, tunnels. But then years later, in my 20s, we went, I was dating this guy who had been a sniper in the Marine Corps, and I got this van and we're traveling around, and I'm like, we gotta go to DC. And so we go to DC, and I find the set of stairways right next to the Red Castle, the Smithsonian Red Castle. And I know that if we go down those stairs, this is the ticket. How did I know this? I don't know. I was there when I was 10. We go down these stairs. I go through the door like I'm nobody's business, and I, look like a crazy hippie like I do now. And next thing you know, we're walking down these underground passageways that lead to the Library of Congress. And we go through, and there's people with proper badges and the MAGA mask type outfit, right? I just call it that because it's a great term, but the Washington DC look, proper, and here we are, like clearly not from around here, and we're walking down these hallways, and we show up and we're in the Library of Congress, and I'm like, how did I know that we would turn up in the Library of Congress? And then we walk out the front door of the Library of Congress and go about our business and try and find our way back to where we had parked the crazy purple painted with a roller hippie van parked on the street. And I'm like, how did I know? So yes, tunnels all the time. Always associated with trains or some kind of transport carts, and military stencil lettering on the wall, usually a letter and then a number signifier.
Hello, everybody. Good evening, and thank you, Charlie Robinson, for introducing me to Annalie. So Charlie has done a lot over the years on MKUltra and the Global Network, the Cabal, and he's a friend of the channel. Absolutely phenomenal research. He wrote the book, The Octopus of Global Control, and he interviewed Annalie, and it's absolutely fascinating. We have been communicating now for about half a year to arrange this. And we are going to get into Annalie's personal story. There are some traumatic moments. There are some hard-hitting moments. So, viewer discretion advised. And because of the nature of this interview, Annalie, I have to ask you, do you give us permission to publish this, and do you waive your anonymity for us to do so?
Absolutely.
Okay, appreciate that. The word MKUltra, it's getting bandied about more, we do see, on various platforms these days. I came across it, I think, reading a David Icke book 20 plus years ago. But for the new viewers who are not familiar with the terminology, are you okay to, how would you define MKUltra?
Well, yeah, I found the name in David Icke's work as well, and certainly had no idea what it was. But my life had a lot of bumps in the road. So I had put together long before that there was a manipulation going on in that. But for me, it's mind control, and it's manipulated mind control so that your own life force is being harnessed and used for other people's purposes and agendas. So for me, the MKUltra term, it's often funny for me now if I look at stuff and I see my name associated with that, because that was not part of the lexicon. But eugenics, transhumanism, and the forces of control have always been there as part of my life. One of my first words was chromosome. So, MKUltra has always been a hidden hand. And it's been a hidden hand in my life. And it's reassuring to me now to know that the not occult anymore. Occult just meaning hidden. And that people need to know that this happens. It's real people, it's ordinary people who have been on the fringes of extraordinary situations and been put in devastating circumstances and put through unimaginable trauma. And so that's what it could be. And then there's an opportunity to move out of that through healing and be a force of awakening in the world. And I think that's, where the activism piece that certainly you in your work has brought through, and with Charlie, and as well Richard Willett, who interviewed me for Iconic. So there's an opportunity to move forward, but it's about revealing this hidden hand that has controlled the minds and the agendas and the life force of humanity for far too long.
And you mentioned two key terms there, mind control and trauma. And it seems like extreme trauma is a fundamental part of the MKUltra program. Would you say that is correct?
Absolutely. Trauma-based mind control, and how that has been researched and understood, the ways the pleasure and pain principle can be inverted and reversed. And certainly now, since post-COVID world, we're seeing this rolled out on everyone. I would say really since about 2012, we were seeing it rolled out more and more. And so some of the programming things that I have endured, which, I'll try and broad brushstroke so for survivors who might be listening to this, I'm not going to go into nitty gritty details. I want to preserve that for myself and also so people can listen, but without going into their own trauma states. But understanding the broad brushstrokes of things that were used on us in programs that were then rolled out into public sphere, and how, as a survivor, seeing that come out, it's really important to speak out about this, because these are things we know. And for those of us who are fairly far on in our healing, we've figured out how to deprogram from and see through the veil, see through, the Wizard of Oz programming and the man behind the curtain, and be able to walk into the real truth of what this is, and just seeing it as a manipulation, because that's all it is. So hopefully that answers that one.
Yeah, so thank you for getting the terminology out of the way. So let's go over your story now in the order everything happened, so the viewers can go on that journey with you. And my first question then will be, what are your earliest memories?
So, it's come forward in pieces. Some of my earliest memories are actually as a baby, and when those, and you're working through this. So I just want to say also, so I live with dissociative identity disorder. That's important for me to get out in the front. Okay, so MKUltra, there's all kinds of extreme abuse. And most of that results in people having something called complex PTSD. If you want to look up for some great definitions on that, I would recommend beautyafterbruises.com. But then if you've been very heavily worked and very manipulated into having a very organized, structured personality system, this is called dissociative identity disorder. In Europe, a lot of times it's called DIS, or dissociative identity syndrome. So it's not a mental illness, it's a mental injury. And it's an injury that is created through the trauma-based mind control. And in order to survive, you have to compartmentalize parts. So some of the first memories that I have are from being an infant. And when those come through, it's just raw emotion, right? So I got some of that back in, let's see, that was 2019. And it took about 4 months of just waking up in the middle of the night, much as an infant might do, crying for a parent that never comes. And then the ways in which some of that was manipulated. So, but the really concrete stuff that I've got a lot of memories back from this. I've worked with these 3 parts, is from about age 4. And that was the first main split that they did. It's 3 parts. And I don't know if you've seen any of the stuff that was done with facial symmetry. That was a big thing in about 2012, people who are looking into the mind control, and particularly celebrities, where there's all kinds of photos of them available. And what you do is you split the face down the center, left and right. Okay, so parts of consciousness, parts of the brain, how the brain works on that. And then you match left to left and right to right. And then you have the regular, which is left and right together. And you can see that there are different personalities. So the first sets of those memories, there were three. They have names. They were assigned names. And then I through the course of healing, it's good to command your own sovereignty. So they exist, they're not going away, they're a part of me. So they have their own names that they've chosen for themselves. So I don't know if for people who are not listening to the audio who can see this is from my book, but so these are some photos. This is me at age 4, and that's the whole self, left and right together. Okay, this one is one of the fractures, and it dodged out there a minute. So that's right to right. Okay, and then this is, let's see, we get it there. That's left to left. Okay, so this is a male part. You can almost see slightly different, and then that's a female part, and then that's the integrated or more front altar. And so those first memories of how they would call you out using those names and what you were supposed to present with, and then so there's different programming, some of it was with owls, toy owls, and how you memorize things and how they can disappear and reappear. So all this is using organic things that are part of the child consciousness. But the thing with DID and why it's a mental injury and not an illness is that you are being traumatized so that you cannot have neurodevelopmental progression in an organic way. And so those milestones cannot be met because you have to hold this trauma in a place, because your caregivers are the ones who you need for food, shelter, comfort, and you can't completely reject that. So when they are the traumatizers, or they're putting you in the hands of those who are doing that, you have to compartmentalize that. But then this means that all of these wonderful things that happen with individuation and having your own soul purpose and your own self, you can't do that. So they talk about DID, they used to call it multiple personality. This is because there is a sense of it being a fractured self. And there are times when it's very staccato and you're only in one part and it doesn't have co-consciousness with the other. And so part of the healing process can be, it doesn't have to be this, but is learning how to work as a team and have co-consciousness. But it's very hard because, if my front part that's talking to you now has to constantly remember agonizing physical details from trauma as a child, it's pretty hard to just function on a day-to-day level. So that is held in a different thing. So it's really not fracturing. It's that you had to build these compartments to hold your own, temple of self up under terribly violent storms. So the earliest memories are about, the first one they fracture is always and then how you're supposed to hold that. So they would use a dollhouse. I was given a dollhouse. It's painted red. It's almost always red. They'll often do color associations with each of these. They can only make 8 compartments, but within those 8 compartments, you may have quite a few different parts. And those parts are, each time you are programmed, assaulted, run through training or whatever, those will separate in, and then they'll compartmentalize them. So for a baby in the crib, they'll put like a blanket sometimes, and then something happens or you're hit or whatever it is, and then you're given a toy, and then that toy is you're shown to put it in a compartment in like a pocket. Okay, so these are ordinary toys and ways that, but it's teaching you to segment and that. So some of the earliest memories, go into that, and then it's It's using food as abuse and withholding or rotten or things with that, and particularly toileting and whether or not you're allowed to go or when you're allowed to go or having to go on command, or using the excrement on your body and gross things like that. So broad brushstroke there with that. But those are the earliest memories. Those are the earliest fragments. And then, some of it when you get it. I mean, I kept remembering meeting Walter Cronkite at age 4 in a grocery store in New York City, where my parents were. And my mother had just left McGill University, which is well known in the MKUltra stuff with you and Cameron. And then I'm there and was enrolled in the Horace Mann preschool. I keep bringing that up in these interviews, and no one's really biting on this. Okay, but this is one of these elite schools, and you have to interview to get in. Well, it was funded. The preschool division was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, and it was an early programming center using elite children for these projects. The larger school has graduated all these people who are now players in these big world forum type organizations, but they had a huge scandal, and the scandal never broke that it happened in the preschool. It absolutely happened in the preschool, very a la McMartin, taken to places like museums and that, and then these weird memories where you only get a little bit when you're 4, and they're coming from the eyes of a traumatized child or that. But I was meeting Walter Cronkite. I was being taken to hair salons where they're bragging about the Kennedys getting their hair cut there, and you have to sit in a little car. Well, by then JFK had been murdered in a car. Now at 4 you don't know that, but it's slowly building in these, I just call it like this, right? Like mirrored reflections, because you're never allowed to see yourself as who you truly are. You can only see yourself in this dizzying narcissistic mirror, right? The myth of Narcissus is beautiful here, because this is someone who is so in love with themselves that they want to see themselves in the mirror. Well, it's not that the child is in love with themselves. You hate yourself, and you're taught to the earliest age. I mean, one of my first attempts was age 4, and I have a up the road scar on my wrist, and oh, mommy, how did that happen? Years later, oh, well, that was your tea set, right? A 4-year-old. So those are the early memories. This is how it builds. And then for me, it continued on, different phases, worked at different levels, but really into my early 20s was when I finally got fully free. I started to fight it like hell when I was 14.
Okay, before we get there, Annalie, could you just explain who your parents were, and do you know how they met?
Yes, so they met at the Galton Laboratory for Eugenics, and it was called that at the time. It's a genetics, and that term is what's understood now. But it is eugenics. It never dropped that name, and that's important for me to get people to understand. So this is eugenics, and then into transhumanism agenda. And they were both graduate students. My mother had already gotten her MD from the University of Pretoria in South Africa, where she grew up and endured her own forms of mind control and certainly medical testing in that because of the rare blood disorder. And then my father was there. He had been in Canada. He had been at McGill and then went to the Galton. And they met there while my mother was doing her PhD, where her project was to clone the rare blood disorder that we both share and that her mother shared. And she had a sister who was murdered by the doctors who also shared that. And they met there. And then basically my father kind of manipulated her and was sort of stalking her, and she was like, no. And this is when Harry Harris was the director of the Galton. And then Harry moved to University of Pennsylvania to take the eugenics agenda, and where the cult wanted that to go to the US, to the University of Pennsylvania. And so my mother then went for a postdoc in Montreal at McGill. And then from there, they were there for some years before they got married, and then she became pregnant with me, was there during the pregnancy, and then we moved to New York, and I was born at the Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. So then she's at Mount Sinai. She was working in pediatric genetics, studying children and genetics. And my father was at the Sloan Kettering Cancer Center doing cancer genetics. And the programming, it begins before birth, and it begins in the womb, and they don't let you go until you fight your way out.
Oh, enjoying the podcast is with my sponsor, Shopify. When I started this podcast, there were a lot of things I had to figure out on my own. Algorithms, guest booking, marketing. I was a bit naive about what was involved, and as you get deeper into it, it starts to overwhelm your life. Finding the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything can be such a game changer. For millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started, such as my co-host Ron's Pokemon business. Get started with your own design studio of hundreds of ready-to-use templates. Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store to match your brand style. Accelerate your content creation. Shopify is packed with helpful AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. Get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you. Easily create email and social media campaigns wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. And best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing returns and beyond. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Turn your big business idea into with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.co.uk/Shaun, SHAUN. Go to shopify.co.uk/Shaun, shopify.co.uk/Shaun. Link in the description if you're watching on YouTube. Thanks for supporting our sponsor. Back to the podcast. Why do you think your parents put you forward for this programming?
So we have a history of multi-generational trauma, which is what they're looking for. And if you look at some of Kathy O'Brien's work with her work with Mark Sullivan, he was talking about, or Mark Phillips, sorry. He was talking about how it really only takes 3 generations of serious trauma to have these pathways of being able to dissociate quickly, easily, and compartmentalize. So your brain needs to work like an archival mind, and it has to be very organized, because you can't make mistakes, because that's dangerous for the perpetrators. So they both have backgrounds of multi-generational trauma. My mother with her upbringing in South Africa during apartheid, and then the medical trauma. She was held in institutions till she was 6 and experimented on. And then my father grew up in a very abusive household, and his father was in the Battle of Vimy and a lot of war trauma. And then that person took it out on his children and was so that's who they're looking for, because that's going to be a really good candidate for the mind control. They've already got 2 generations in the blood, so then you get the third. And if you get them early enough, this is the Freemason phrase, give me a child before 8 and I'll give you the man of the world, or whatever their phrase is. But the earlier they can get them. So this was why. And then in terms of why they would want that for a child, one, with my mother, I just don't think that she has recovered from her programming. I mean, I really think she is herself dissociative. My father certainly as well. And, they sell it as a beautiful thing. And she desperately wanted a career to be someone in the world. And she is a world famous eugenics researcher. She is an MD, PhD, and she consults for NIH. She's on grant review boards deciding who gets money for funding and who doesn't. She's, worked all over the world in all these gene mapping conferences and that. She wanted that. And so how do you get your title if you're no one? You have to pony up, right? And so these families are targeted for that, and benefits are given. Now, does she think of it like this? I don't think so. I mean, I really think she just, there's so much disconnect and there's so many lies, and they absolutely cannot understand what it is they've done. But I mean, I haven't had any contact with her for years. I do still look at what her research is going, and those pathways are um, because she's still hurting kids. The bottom line is she still has access to thousands of patients all over the world and is driving research and funding for research that is impacting children. She founded the genetic counseling division at UC Irvine. So if you want to look at eugenics, you know, they can't. Eugenic counseling is like a great example of this slippery slope of like, oh, well, they're an authority and they'll, yeah, these are just people who are convincing you to like murder your kid or not have a kid because they don't want you to, you know, they don't want you to live. They don't want you to live. That's the bottom line. So why did they choose this life? I have no idea, but I think fame and opportunity, and then, you know, the notoriety of getting to have a kid. But I mean, then they got into it and realized that, I remember at one point I have two children of my own, and, you know, she said to me, "Oh my Lord, can you imagine having to work with two?" Okay, so you could think of it as a woman, single mother at this point, because they divorced when I was 9, but having to work with two children, certainly. But the way, I mean, this is where the archival mind and being very highly attuned to emotions and being very perceptive with human behavior, and that is absolutely how you have to survive like this as an MK. Um, she meant having to work two subjects. So I was always referred to as Miss Mouse. So she used mice in her genetic experiments, and of course all the mice get cold, you know, so there's this threat always. And yeah, I was called the control sample when she would sample me in our house when I was like 8. This began in Tustin, California, and she's at the University of California, Irvine, and you know, she needs to run off on Saturday morning to run some experiments in the lab when no one is there. Why does no one have to be there? Or do you just want to get away from your family? I don't know. But, you know, I'm asleep in my bed and she'll pull my arm out and take blood samples. So very simple, but it's that attacking. And when you've already been coded with this, you know, it's in your own home. You need this person for food and shelter, and it's absolute garbage to them. They need a blood sample to run as a control with this other stuff, and oh look, there's a piece of meat in the bed, like, you know, take the blood. So it's not, and these are people who have huge amount of control in the present day, making decisions about children, who's you know, coaching people on whether or not to have children, who's going to get funding, and it goes completely unchecked. And whistleblowers, you know, I have a case with this. They don't. We get no voice in this. We can try, but it's very hard because these people are wired into this mindset of total narcissistic sociopathy that is accepted across the board as normal behavior.
Going back to your story, Annalie, so as you were beginning to learn language as a child, how was it being explained to you what was happening? I imagine because that's all you knew, you thought it was normal?
That's a difficult one. I mean, it's just interwoven in the way you live your life, and it's built in as play. So, for example, you know, my mother would go away to a conference or be at work, and I had a nanny and I was in preschool and this. But, you know, if my father, who was the primary caregiver at this time, he would play these games. So from age 4, we would play hide and seek, normal game to play with a child, okay? But then he would leave a suitcase out, and I had to, oh, go hide in the suitcase is a perfect thing, you know, and then it was all built on this training of being able to ride in a suitcase without screaming with it closed so that they can get you into other locations unseen, unheard. You won't scream, and you'll get out and you'll do whatever they tell you when you get to the other side. Okay. So I don't know all of those parts. I can get to some of it. And for other survivors doing the memory work, I would encourage you to hold your window of tolerance for what you're willing to look at and when you need to look at it. And if you need to look at it very closely and be very aware of what needs to be worked, because you don't need to know all of it. But you need to get to where you convince yourself that this is real, because I mean, it absolutely wasn't real for me until, I mean, and even it gets more real all the time. But I mean, I did not know that this was not normal, and I did not know that this was happening to me in this way. So there's the riding in suitcases, and why do we have to do this? Why am I taken to my first passport photos of me? And you know, now they only let you have your head in it, but back then it was sort of spaced back, and I was holding a Mickey Mouse marionette. So marionette, strings pulling, but the Mickey Mouse is a coding term. And my first trip internationally to be internationally or taken to these things, I don't really know all of what was used for. Some of it was truly just medical, or running sort of these like mind games and tests, right? It's not all child. And some of that I just don't get into very much. And I don't think it's as relevant, because people need to understand that children are being used in many more ways than just, okay, they're being used to assess information and stuff like that. So I was taken to Basel, Switzerland. The International Society for Human Gene Mapping was held there. That would have been 1980. And have to have the passport photo identifying me. And then she goes, we were mostly staying in Basel, but she goes someplace, and of course Switzerland is a big mind control programming center. There's a big, you know, if you want to use Illuminati or whatever these terms are, I think they're kind of ridiculous and erroneous, but the groups, you know, the controlled organized crime groups, have big centers, certainly financial centers in Switzerland, but also medical stuff. And I'm taken there, and then my father is taking me during the day to go see castles. So these big elite buildings with ancient history and ancient ritual history, now being run as like tourist things. So just to give people a little visual, think of the stupid Twilight movies and how the Volturi have this little, you know, people can come through and look at it and know it's this castle and and then go on the tour, right? And then, you know, right? Okay, so who gets taken out on that? But it's a tourist destination, really good for money flow and all that, right? So we're going to these castles. I'm age 4, and I split my head. I actually have quite a pronounced scar, and I get taken to some kind of hospital, and they have to stitch it up. But so this is the story, right? This is the narrative that you get told of that. And I do sort of remember some of that, but I remember a bunch of other stuff. I wrote this out when I had my blog in 2012. And so that, if you look at Prince William, he has a similar scar. Okay. I think they call this the mark of the lamb in some of the ritual stuff. But things were done on that trip. Okay. So I'm losing my train of thought here with this, but the snippets that come in, you're going to get just little broken bits, and having to put it together. It's taken me, you know, really since 2011, heavy memory work. Understanding where the pieces fit and having a huge tolerance for not understanding how it goes together and how it has context with this other larger global picture that's happening. It takes a really long time and a lot of patience, and a lot of times you just have to go inward and say, okay, I'm just going to enjoy and do things that are fun and try and be fully present. And then you choose your times to do the memory work carefully and with good support if possible, because it's hard. I mean, since we spoke, you know, and the interviews with Charlie and Richard, this whole other arena opened up, and I was having to get through programming that I was emotional flooding, and I basically relived huge sections of physical trauma for 3 months at a time, these last 3 months, and it was excruciating. And the level of work I had to do to be able to be here today speaking to you, it's like I just had to say, okay, step back. I'm of no use to the effort to protect children who are being harmed now, or activism, if I can't hold center. So just to other survivors who are hearing this and being like, wow, how'd you get to here? It's like, it's not easy. So take your time and be patient with yourself. And be willing to not know how the pieces fit together for a very long time.
So, as a child, then, how often were you transported to outside locations for mind control purposes?
Um, so I'm going to go forward a little bit in time, just because that's a little bit easier to work with, and the memories are a bit more tangible. So from about the age of 8 until 12 or 13, I was taken all over the world. Some of these were for personal family trips. At one point in 1984, we went to South Africa to meet family for the first time, and that it was during the year that Zola Budd tripped Mary Decker in the Olympics. So the Olympics figure in with this, but we're there, and basically that was where the ritual abuse aspect came in. And I was the culmination of that was being forced to watch a ritual murder of a woman, and then trying to leave the country to get back to California. Our plane stopped in Kenya for a transfer, and there was a bomb scare on it 3 times in a row. They kept calling it in, and so they kept doing things to manipulate during that. So at one point, you had to leave everything on, and you were running down the runway and turning around expecting to see the plane explode. That doesn't happen. And then all our baggage gets sent out, and all of it comes out except for I had this one doll. It was a Fisher Price Mandy doll in a blue dress with white polka dots and a red hat, red shoes. Okay, so these are again color things. And the very last thing to come around the turnstile was my doll. So these are the ways in which they twist things, and seeing the teddy bear of some other child cut open. These are very common uses in programming. So that I'm taken to conferences all over the world and left in hotel rooms, to Japan in 1986 after my grandmother had died, and like hours and hours and hours in these hotel rooms where I don't have any access to someone, or I don't speak the language, but there's the mini bar, right? And so that's when you get into the addiction links, that because the trauma, it goes very well with the addiction, right? And using that to mask, and how but you're not supposed to do that. So you drink it all and you fill it with water at the tap and you screw the thing, and all these clever little ways a child mind works to try and figure your way out of the rat cage that you're being put in.
Annalie, can I just go back to the ritual? Do you remember like what people were wearing, what it looked like inside, any symbology, what people were saying, chanting, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I'm going to go a little bit faster here. Just that's how I'm going to get through it. Okay, so it starts with I have to be left at some location early in the morning, no water, no hat, and we're going to go on an ox cart ride. There is another girl there who is my mother's friend in South Africa, and that's her daughter. And we are led by the Maasai in red on an ox cart ride through the South African savannah, thinking that if you try and run away, you're going to get eaten by a lion, as an 8-year-old from Southern California. It's a pretty good wall of security that you're going to stay on an ox cart ride. So no water, no food, parched throat, heat stroke, get to the fair, which I don't know who this group was, and mother's not there to meet me, but of course I want her, and then having to run through the fair, and at one point a turkey chases us. and then these whole bulls, so the bull symbolism, and stripped of skin, so skinned bulls being roasted on a spit, and the smoke and the smell, so smoke, smell, these are, they get into you with a lot of sensory stuff, parched, and then this huge buffet of like all the most wonderful food you could imagine, but I can't eat it because my throat has swollen shut because I haven't had. So this is the wear down, overwhelm, and then you just, and mother's not going to comfort. I'm in a foreign country. I don't know who any of these people are. And then I was basically flopped. So I want to go over this fight, right? But as a child, you're not going to win. So you quickly give up on that. Flight. So this is the dissociation piece because you're not really going to be able to run away. But then there's three others. Freeze, right? But that's temporary. That's where you're going to try and figure out which one's going to work. Flop. This is when it's totally overwhelming to the neurosystem. This is the polyvagal theory. I highly recommend people look at a site called dis-sos.com. It's written for people with DID, and she goes over the polyvagal theory and how this is neurodevelopmentally, how this is being done, and why biologically it's so hard to come out of, right? But so flop, this is when the body anesthetizes itself because you're preparing for death, and it's going to make it an easy death for you, and your your breathing rate slows, your heart rate slows. So this is where some of the things like Kathy O'Brien talked about her daughter having this respiratory drive problem when she broke free and was getting away. So the respiratory drive is hugely utilized because it's going to change brain chemistry and all this, but it's also part of this polyvagal theory in the flop state. The other one is called fawn. So flight, fight, freeze, flop, and fawn. Fawn is the worst, and it's what's happening all over the world with everyone who is being trauma-based mind controlled by the media. And this is where you're like, oh, it's Stockholm syndrome. Okay, this is the easiest way to describe it. And where you're going to try and be the most perfect little person so that they love you and abuse stops. So at that ritual, I mean, the bull, but then I get taken to a car and put in a car, and all of the other stuff gone. I have no memory of it. What I got back was in 2013, after I had already gone public, and I was working with a group of other survivors, people who know Duncan and Miranda and the super soldier stuff, Sarah Stanga in the UK and her work with Miles Johnston, Randy Moggins, Dave Corso. This was the group that I was working with, and we were targeted by a group called the Temple of Set, and I was targeted later by a faction of that called the Gray Faction, and I was picked up again. So, but the ritual stuff completely gone. But in 2013, I got this piece back where I saw the murder. I saw what happened, and it was grisly. So this is where it's really hard in understanding how to believe yourself and having the traction to believe it, because it's like, well, you're missing the crux, right? But you're not. You are that. And so to survivors who are having a hard time putting together what you may have lived through or this, but I mean, the symbolism of the teddy bear being ripped, okay, some of this, but in terms of like am I going to tell you I saw a Masonic symbol or like the Illuminati? No, like gone. All you remember is the trauma. And then, I can get context because that's where there would be like what they call bleed throughs or avataring, where more front person parts of my personality who had to figure out how to navigate an airport or interface with other adult passengers who were all standing around the baggage claim waiting for baggage. That has to be a front part who can hold social normal. But still you're running, I saw the teddy bear split open, I saw the woman murdered. So it's teaching you how to be an incredible actor and hold different parts, but it's not acting. It is very real, and it's about how developmentally you've been forced to compartmentalize in order to survive the trauma, just to be able to, all I wanted to do at that point was get back to California. And believe me, California was a hellhole in 1984 in terms of my life and what I was living through there. So I'm sorry I can't give you more on the ritual and who was involved. I don't know. I have no idea of who they were. But apartheid was in full swing.
As all this is going on, then are you, like I said, you said earlier, this is the normal to you. But is there a point where you're realizing, perhaps? I mean, did you have friends your age, and you started to compare yourself to other people?
I was always told, oh, we're different than other people and we're not like that. So, but very, you'll hear my accent change a little bit. Part of that is that I have a part, it's the internal critic, and it mimics her voice. So she's from South Africa and then spent a lot of time in England. So she has accent. So I'm not doing it to be rude with the across the pond thing. It's this part that's coded to speak like that. So, you're different. With school, I'm in school, I have friends, but I constantly get taken out of school to go to these conferences around the world. Or there was a time period in about 1988-89 where she was doing a blood study in Utah. So this might be of interest because it relates to the ritual stuff and the spiritual stuff, but also the academic medical. And she was doing studies on the Mormon population in Utah. Okay, so this is multi-generational trauma, well known for their polygamy, well known for their in that. And she was studying a genetic disorder that basically comes from the and that results in mental retardation and developmental delay. And I'm taken with her, and I have to either stay in the hotel room or help her navigate, because she's a very frightened, frigid, strange woman, tiny. I mean, I'm like 5'9" and she's 5'4", and I got big quite quickly. So, I was like her bodyguard, but I'm the kid, it was ridiculous. And if she would go, we once went to a state mental facility back when they had these, and there was a very severely mentally retarded boy there who she needed a blood sample from, and I had to wait in the car. So hot car, and then all of the car wreck programming. I'm just going to tangentially reference that, but you're stuck in the car and she has to go in, get this blood. And so apparently this boy didn't want it done and fought, and he was large, and they had to get all these people to like dogpile him and hold him down to draw it. So then she gets back to the car and she's in tears, and I'm like